We are genuinely delighted and deeply privileged to have Peter Vickery join us in our little office, in our studio today, to talk about the future, his voice of the future, how he projects his thoughts and ideas into the future, and what are those really important nuggets in his life that he will share with us today. Peter, welcome. Good to see you here.
Thank you, Tarek. Real pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for having me. Looking forward to the conversation.
Absolutely, and it's just one of those things, you know, when you connect nicely with somebody, which we did right from the very beginning, you know, we shared a lot of values together, and it's wonderful to have you on board as one of the key people in the financial sector, as a voice for the future, because that's what this thing is about. So before we move into it, can you just share with us about yourself, who you are, where you come from, and just some starting point, your nuggets of your life?
Sure, with pleasure. I've lived in the UAE for 5 years, got 2 children I worship who are 11 and 13. I work for FAB, which I love every single day. I wake up and I love what I do. Originally from the UK, born and bred in Nottingham. First 16 years at school, left school at 16, started work at 16 in a bank round the corner from me making the coffee. I left with pretty much no exams, started working at 16, and by 26 was the youngest director ever in Barclays at the time, in charge of 400 branches, 4,000 people, did all those frontline jobs. Then went back and did a lot of education. One of our connections, spent 3 months at Harvard, 3 months at Cambridge, did my banking degree. And then at 30, moved to Botswana. And I've spent probably 19 out of the last 21 years out of the UK, in South Africa, in Botswana, in the UAE. And absolutely love the experience of the learnings through that. And now, like I say, here 5 years in the UAE, and feel very privileged to live and work here in the UAE and bring my children up here.
You know, I've been here in the UAE for forever. I mean, almost 25 of the last 35 years. I graduated. My first job was actually in Dubai. And I've seen it. I've seen this from a desert town to a metropolis that it is today. But in this journey, I learned a lot, and we'll talk about that in the future. But just going back to your early childhood, is there a memory that you have from your mum or dad, or from your school, that you'd like to share that helped to shape your life, helped to be part of who you are today?
Absolutely. My mum and dad were fantastic at bringing me, my brother and sister up, but my dad's work ethic, I think. My father was a painter, painted houses, and I never saw someone who worked harder or who loved their work more. But he refused to teach me to paint. I said to him, "Won't you teach me to paint so I can be a painter?" He said, "No, it's too tough a life. I want you to work in an office. So I'm not going to teach you to paint, so I want you to work." But I still went to follow him at work. And I remember, this is a strange story to tell in the UAE, but in the UK, you have radiators on the wall. And he said to me, "I always take the radiator off, paint completely behind the wall, and you see all the different colours the house has been painted because nobody's ever painted there."
Yes.
I said, "Why don't they paint?" He says, "Because you put the radiator back on, and so nobody sees it." So I said, "Well, why do you do it?" He's like, "I do it for myself." He said, "Not for my customers. It's the pride in knowing I did a job well." He says, "Nobody sees that, but I do it." And for me, leadership's like that. I say to anybody, people say, "What do you think of this person? What do you think of?" I say, I never worry what anybody thinks, apart from I know I've done a good job. When people aren't watching, leadership is what you do when people aren't watching. And I saw my father, he cared. He never let any ounce of anything go from work. Whether anyone noticed or not, I wasn't the point. If a job was worth doing, it was worth doing well. And I think I've sort of lived with that mantra and followed it through my life.
It's an amazing story, because work ethic and integrity, which is another very important trait that we've learned from our parents, is the things that you do when nobody's watching. That to me is the definition of integrity. And you are in the financial sector, and I think we need to find a way to bring that back into our financial world, and we'll dive deeper as we progress. So, interestingly enough, I mean, you would have been the blue-eyed boy going to Oxford, Cambridge, working through that track, but you left at 16.
Yep.
And, I've interviewed a lot of people in a similar situation where they left at 16, 18, then travel around the world and so on. What was that experience for you, not going to college, but going into what I would call an apprenticeship? And how does that work, and does that apply in today's world?
Very much so, I think. I think it's always individual. So it was right for me. I remember, again, my parents saying, university, college wouldn't work for you. I didn't agree with the education system. I made jokes in the exams because I thought it was the wrong way to learn. I was very opinionated. I was prime minister of the school, so I had a lot of voice. But I just didn't work for me, and I had to do that later.
Yeah.
What it taught me was that hard work and on the ground reality. So I had to work my way up doing those jobs. And I don't think there's anything like that. I think understanding what people do is so fundamental. So I really learned that. And I think, like you said, that apprenticeship, even to this day, I remember back to those days. I've been in those positions. I know what it was like to work. And I had to work hard. I had to prove myself. I had to be the best. Yeah. So to go from 16 to 26, from making the coffee to being in charge of 4,000 people, I was the best at every single job I did. And I worked hard for that. But people should say I was the top seller in thousands and thousands of people in the UK. And they said, how'd you do it? I said, I just wanted it more. So it wasn't just that I wanted it kind of thing. I wasn't always the most skillful. And if I think of what I tell my kids, you won't be the cleverest in class always. You won't be the best at every sport. Nobody is. Yeah. You can always be the most positive. You can always be the hardest working. You leave nothing. If that means you're 10th out of 10, that doesn't matter. But you give everything that's inside you, and you can't do any more. Yeah.
May I challenge you on that a little bit? Because I am seeing this thing evolve now with the recent ChatGPT revolution that's happening. That is it about working hard? Is it about that work ethic? And a lot of young people that are coming through to saying, we can do this really quickly. We can do this fast. And is it about hard work? And Bill Gates very famously said once that I look for the laziest person in my office because he's the smartest one who's doing his job in the least amount of time. What are your views on young people coming through as they go into the future? That hard work ethic versus the technology enablers and the technology multipliers that we have today, where actually hard work is less important and perhaps empathy is more. Thoughts?
It's a great conversation. Work smart, not hard. I was taught at the same time. So absolutely, in a minute you can do something brilliant that is worth more than a week's work, for sure. It's the quality. I think of my children. So I think I talked to my daughter last night, saying, this is what I'm going to do tomorrow. What would I say to you in 10 years, I think was one of the questions we talked about. And she said instantly, work hard, don't be lazy, get a great job. And I was like, okay, I put down be happy for you. That was what was in my mind. And it was interesting because my 11-year-old daughters, I've had an influence, a big influence. I know she listens a lot to me, but clearly I've put those values in her. And she said, why would you say be happy? And I said, because if you're doing something for years and I love what I do. I enjoy every moment. I have bad moments like anybody, but genuinely, every day I wake up and I'm happy with what I do. I never regret the job I do. You want to be a vet because you love animals. So you should do something you love. We have to work hard by it. Absolutely. Also, I think the speed. I used to talk about in the UK, I was important. In Africa, when I worked, it was about we. If I think of what I learned in the UAE, it's speed. I think speed is such an important value. And it's interesting, I was dropping my son off at his friends, and he's rang 3 or 4 friends in the space of 2 minutes. I'm like, why are you ringing them all? Why don't you just have a WhatsApp group or something? He's like, Dad, you're so out of it. Well, he says, we haven't got time for these groups and these things. He says, we ring each other. We talk to each other. I haven't got time for that. Wow, what a difference. Because I think, people stopped talking as much on the phone because they sort of text, WhatsApp, whatever, the medium. His view was, I haven't got time for that. I want to speak and do it quick. So no, I still think working hard as a value is important. And to me, it's about not the hours you put in, but the what you give of yourself. So, giving of yourself, I think, is important. But equally, I think your point is very right. 1 or 2 moments of magic can be worth months of hard work, kind of thing. If that's the thing that ignites someone, makes a difference, a new idea, that they are that. So I think it's a blend of both.
Indeed. My learning from my parents, and as we're talking about these things, my dad was anything that doesn't kill me will be good for me. So hurt yourself, fall over, bruise your knees, do whatever's necessary. While my mum was much more protective. So she used to, slide a little bit of money from going to buy a new tennis racket, or something like that. My dad said, no, you've got to earn this. You've got to train kids and I was 10, 12, but he said, no, be a coach. Earn your money. That's how you buy a racket. It's not like he couldn't afford it, but he wanted me to have that work ethic, which I have to this day. And it holds me in good stead because I have that base level value. Moving forward, one of the critical values, I think, and I love your opinion on it, is that I believe that the future is going to be defined by trust. Trust has always been at a premium, but today it is off the charts important. Because we've lost trust in our institutions, we've lost trust in our governments, and in the banking and financial sector, it is crumbling in terms of lack of trust. In the US, there's a statistic that only 28% of the people trust their financial institution to be honest and fair to them. That's the trust deficit we have. What do we do about building that trust back?
Great point. And in banking, in my industry, I think you're right. Trust is absolutely critical. It's what banks were built on. It's the foundation of banking and absolutely critical. I think of 2 things at a personal and a leadership kind of level. So first of all, again, I suppose it's a value I look very young. Always treat everybody the same. I always don't look at or don't think of who is that person, who do they know, where are they connected. A person's a person. So I can remember at a very young age, I was career going up and I'm talking to the CEO of a big bank next to me. And I said, sorry, because the waiter was talking to me next to me. And it was a moment for me to say, 2 people, nothing more than 2 people. And you have to treat everybody exactly the same. And again, if I think what I teach my kids, one of the most important things to me, you treat everybody the same. You don't care gender, race, religion, anything. You treat a person as a human being and you treat everyone the same. So I think that's really important. As a leadership skill, I always try and do that. I don't worry about who knows what. I just treat people the same. Second, I think if you ask the people I lead, they will tell you I'm pretty candid, pretty straight talking. I wear my heart on my sleeve. If you look at me, you can normally tell what I'm thinking or feeling. I give that away. And to me, I think that's really important. In the UK, you might call it playing with a straight bat, being really, call a spade is a very English saying. So if someone comes to me with a new idea, and I think it's not very good, I think that's a terrible idea. I would never do that. But I'll absolutely back and support you. Because I wouldn't do it for this reason. I'm probably wrong. I may well be wrong. So you should do it. So I think that honesty is at the heart of trust. Because I think if people can see that you've got integrity, that you speak straight, so in the language that you speak to people. And if you think of customers, language should be simple, should be straight. Everyone, of course, wants to market things, but you've got to be honest, you've got to be straight. And so for me, those 2 kind of traits at a leadership level, when you lead large groups of people, I hope people see that in me. I think one of the things people say is you're fair, you're always consistent, you're always the same. Whoever it is, that's the response you have. And I think that's an important thing.
I think it is, but that's part of the answer, Peter, and that is that you've spoken about your personal leadership style, about authenticity and about building that level of connection. I want to go beyond. I want to say institutionally, organizationally, how are we building trust? Because most people, and sadly, we're in the world of what I would call hypercapitalism, where we've got to make the ROI, we've got to make the money, we've got to deliver the KPIs, we've got to do all of that. And we are losing ourselves a little bit, where whichever industry you look at, let's move away from finance for a second. Let's look media. I've been in the media world and I've worked with some of the top organizations. When you have a $10 million account coming from somebody providing a defense contractor, and I am doing a program about war or peace, I'm not going to talk about the defense contractor. So in other words, my sense of independence has been compromised. Now, will I change that? That's how the incentive system is structured. So therefore, what is happening now is my trust level in media is diminishing. Why? Because the incentive system is wrong and is all about making money. So bringing it back into your world, what do we need to do in a financial world where we need to not just be honest, but be seen to be honest? And there are times where there are more than a single stakeholder, not just your shareholder, but your customer, their customers, your team. I just wanted you to, share some of your thoughts around that.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I think it's a complex answer and it's evolving. I think there's a few things to think about. There's the regulation and the rules, and I think making sure that you're very clear on those rules is important. And then I go back to consistency, so if I bring it into a world of sales, sales is one of my areas of specialism. You have to fire the top seller if they break the rules. You've got to do that, and how much, there's a pot to do, but they're the best seller.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. The rules are the rules. So the rules are either for everyone or they're for no one. And they're for everyone. So I think that rules and regulation part is really important. I think then the values of the organisation. I think the leadership part does play a role because I think the culture sets a tone and the values. Also then I think what you measure. Measurement is really important to me. So I've done an article on how you measure. I think a balanced scorecard kind of approach is important because if you overemphasize, to your point, on certain incentives or you only focus on one area, there's a risk that drives the wrong behavior. So I think that balanced scorecard approach is always important to make sure you're playing those. So I think it's a mix and it's a constant thing you've got to think about, and as you said, trust is not easy. If you think of, if you said on a personal level, how many people do you trust? And then how many people do you know? I would guess one is very big, an awful lot of people. How many people do you trust? I think for most people that's quite a small number. So you have to work pretty hard to build a customer's trust as an organisation. And again, I suppose that's over time. I don't think it's one interaction. It's about consistency, about discipline, about repetition, that every moment the customer needs you, you're there. In any different channel, any way, you're there. And I think that starts to build trust as well. And to my industry, that's I guess an omni-channel kind of approach in a banking technology word that says wherever you are, wherever you want to, we're there for you. We're there for you.
It's interesting you talk about an omni-channel approach, and we'll get into that a little bit more. May I touch on a couple of things? I mean, when we're talking omni-channel, we're also now talking about the new banking structures that are coming in and fintech that's coming in and so on. One of the statistics is that I think it was 58% of millennials do not trust their banks, and they would rather work with fintechs. Now, if more than half of the people in this part of the world, we're a little bit more conservative, but generally speaking, young people want to work on fintechs. They trust technology more than that. What is your approach in terms of embracing these people, or are you adapting to this new world?
No, for sure. I think there's a couple of things there. I think the open banking opportunity is massive. And if you think of the app usage and the way you talk to clients, and like I say, if I think of my children, the way they interact is really interesting. And you learn from that, looking at different generations. I think it's so important, making sure you've got a balanced team and you're taking those points on. It is really, really fundamental to those. Also, I think, though, if you speak to anyone, they want to lose the administration part. They want to lose the routine part. So things like mobile banking, making sure transactions are easy and seamless is really important, because when you want a real finance conversation, I think it's really important to people. So checking a routine transaction in your financial world is very basic and takes seconds. It should be seamless, simple, you don't know about it. And so the approach I think about is that should be the sort of mobile banking. That should be the easiest thing to do in seconds. With great AI, it should even be done for you.
Indeed.
But when you want to talk about buying a property, I think that's a conversation.
Sure.
Now, you might want that conversation on a mobile phone. You might want that conversation on Zoom. You may want that conversation in person. You may want it in a coffee shop. You may want it in a branch. You may want it in your place of work. But you probably still want a conversation. And so that's what I try and think of,
Right.
how you build that trust again.
Yeah.
You're there for a customer at a different point. And you segregate the complex, which I still think there are. I think if you're talking about investments, people, money, that's a big deal for people. You know, if you're talking about basic day-to-day payments, I think that's very transactional.
It is. However, a lot of the statistics that I'm seeing is that robo-advisors will be worth $100 trillion in the next 5-7 years. And now with AI bots coming in and the trust level increasing in the transactional capability, and with the markets becoming so complex and so responsive to very, very small elements, human beings can't absorb all of that. So I think the way I'm looking at it is more of a hybrid. And basically build trust at a human level, but use technology to deliver the advice. Because it's like a doctor. I mean, if I'm your doctor, my role as a person to have diagnosis as a doctor would go down because machines will do it. But my caring for you needs to go up. My looking after you needs to go up. So that empathy and humanity goes up while the diagnostics go down. And I think that's, for me, applying in banks also. And for complex transactions, even more so, because you have all of the back-end data coming through, but then they trust you, not the system. So how is your environment adapting to that?
So I articulate a very similar way, actually. I said doctor analogy is great. I use what I call a pizza analogy.
Right.
So I say customers want everything at different times. So I like pizza. So I like pizza that I cook in the oven. I like pizza that I order on takeaway. Sometimes I go out to a restaurant to eat pizza. They're very different, but I like pizza. I think banking's similar. Certain things you just want to do at home are very simple. Transactional, you've got a mobile phone, you can easily do that. Sometimes you want to order in. So you might want to talk to someone on a chatbot, you might want a quick conversation with someone, you may want some support to do that. Sometimes you want to actually have the full experience and go out for dinner and meet someone and discuss that. Now, you want to do all those things at different times. So for me, that's the way. Again, watching a film, you could apply the same thing. I may watch a film in my bed on an iPad. I may watch it on the TV. I may go to the cinema. So it's all those mixed together, but they're at the right time. And if you think of the fifth revolution, you know, that's about that human technology part coming together. And I think you're absolutely right. So if I think of, a lot of people talk to me about the branch of the future. Does the branch exist? Why would a branch exist? Really, why would a branch exist? I've been asked that my career 1,000 times. It's a good question. And yet still lots of people do go to a branch. But surely they don't want to do a basic transaction. Then why would you want to park? Why would you want to go to do? So all the technology that can be used should be used in a branch. But maybe you want someone to use that technology with and turn it into a conversation. So if you're buying a property, maybe you want somebody that, maybe you also need to partner. Maybe it's the ecosystem of buying a property. Buying a property is not a mortgage. Nobody wants a mortgage. We want property. So maybe it's the person who furnishes it. The home buying people are there. Maybe it's the developer who's there to find the right place. But somebody has to finance it, putting that together. You might want to sit in a place. Is that a branch? You know, could that be a virtual branch? Absolutely, it could be. But is there some physicality of personhood to it? Is there a conversation between individuals? I think there is. And I think, to your point, that emotional intelligence is even more important. And if you think of, I know we talked about listening, and that's a great point. I think the lessons I've learned at school, they used to say, Peter, you got 2 ears, 1 mouth. I was very good at talking, not so good at listening. And it's a challenge. I have to learn to listen. My son is a listener in his school class. I'm so proud of him because he's a brilliant listener. He's so emotionally intelligent. He's so much better than I am. But I think that's a skill, even with the best AI in the world, an interpretation, and someone might just want a human to listen, as well as, like you said, working with that technology, with that AI, with all the metaverse and opportunities that we have. So to me, it's collectively coming together. It's not one or the other. It's bringing them together.
It's interesting you talk about listening. I built my career initially around the sales environment, very much like yourself, and I learned very, very quickly that you listen twice as much as you speak, and building that level of human connection. And my best clients almost became my best friends, and if they called me at 10 o'clock at night, I used to actually love that, because they feel close enough, because they were in trading and treasury and so on, and it was important to them, and I actually welcomed it. And the clients loved it, because they said, I can trust this guy because he's always there for me. And I think that's kind of thing that sort of comes through. We discussed a lot about where we are today. One institution I'd like to share with you, one use case that I work with, and I teach this in my workshops with financial institutions and actually non-financial institutions both, and that's DBS Bank in Singapore, a very famous case study. They went from number 50 to number 1, and they say 7 of the last 9 years they've been the most admired, most sought after bank, most profitable in terms of the number of people and so on. They came up with 3 things. One of them, digital to the core. Secondly, opening themselves up through APIs and so on to their customers, changing the culture from becoming a financial institution that has technology. They became a technology institution that does some financial work. And the last one is thinking like a startup, a 22,000 people startup. What are your thoughts in terms of that cultural shift and financial shift, financial organization shift? Is that doable in this part of the world?
Absolutely, yeah. We talked about speed.
Yes.
I share with a lot of people. I joined one of the biggest banks in the Middle East. On the 17th day, I presented to the group CEO for 3 hours, and the executive team had agreed my whole strategy on the 17th day.
Wow.
Well, there's not many companies that would do that. If I think of my UK experience, that would not have happened. It would not have happened, kind of thing. If I think of my South African experience, I don't think that would have happened. Here it happens. So when I interview people, I talk to them about their technical skill, but if I'm interviewing them, they're normally quite experienced. Their technical skill, if they're a marketing person, credit, they know what they do. I can't add much. So I talk to them about culture, and I talk to them in the work environment. Do they enjoy speed? Do they enjoy, not 80-20, 50-50, I say, because the world of having everything perfect, the world of not being able to let go of something when it doesn't work, being able to check, is different. And I love that about the UAE. I see that, you look at the speed the countries responded, you look at the COVID challenges that we went through in the speed. I love living in this country because of that speed. I love working where I work because of the speed that we work in. And when I agreed my strategy on the 17th day, I said to people, it feels like a startup. To work for a big bank on the 17th day, to have everything agreed, signed off by everyone, and just focus on delivery, looking after customers, I think it's pretty quick.
You know, the leadership in Dubai at the top level, which will remain nameless right now, but one of the things they said about speed was that it's like driving the Formula One. Every now and then you'll hit the sides, but which keep going, but that's how you can win. And that's where speed is is indeed a factor. We're talking to Peter Vickery about the future. He is a voice of the future, and we are now getting to the point in our conversation where we really are projecting ourselves into the future, amplifying this voice into the future, and looking at all of the things that are yet to happen rather than the ones that have already happened. Peter, I saw a statistic, a big meta trend from Dell, which said that 70 to 80% of the jobs in banking and finance by 2030 do not exist today. So your team today, 70% of those jobs will not exist in 2030. What are your thoughts on it, and what are you doing to get them ready for that?
It's a great point, and it shows adaptability is so critical. And I remember someone said to me, if you've got knowledge of over 3 years ago, it's probably irrelevant. It's probably out of date. So again, it shows how important it is to adapt and change. and enjoy that. We talked about speed. For me, one of the things is to be able to enjoy that, being able to enjoy letting go, to enjoy working at pace, and enjoy and embrace change. So I think that's fundamental. So, and again, I think if you think back, if I think what I did before, previously, it's changed completely what I did. So, and I think it's less about skill set and more about attitude and emotional intelligence of what you do. So if I think about lessons in leadership, when I was in the UK, I told you that story, 16 to 26, I told that story to anybody in the UK. I'd done every one of their jobs to the best in the UK. I got instant credibility. So I told that story. I was a hero. I was the role model. I got instant credibility. I moved from the UK to Botswana, a country I never heard of, if I'm honest. And I went across as the head of retail banking to look after 3 countries there. They put me up in this amazing house. I was the only expat. And I tried to tell the story of being a 16-year-old making the coffee. And, I did your job. And people looked at me like I was crazy. It just did not land at all. So I had to change everything I thought of about leadership. I didn't change who I was, I didn't change my personality, but I had to change my approach. So I think that's what you've got to teach people now. I think it's not about that pure skill set, it's about that adaptability, because what's interesting with that statistic is they don't know what those jobs are going to be.
Indeed.
So you can't put a training program in. You can't say it's a social engineer, it's an emotional intelligence role. Nobody knows. What you can change is the behavior and the person within it.
We have a future readiness program, which actually I've even shared with you. Yeah. And we are applying it to various people. And what the future readiness program is doing is making them ready for, say, the next 2 or 3 years, by which time the future readiness program will be updated. It will be another 2 or 3 years. Because there's nothing that I see out there at this point in time which is actually talking to people about being future ready. They're talking about people being more efficient, more effective in their day-to-day jobs, delivering their numbers, etc., etc. And I feel that I have something called the 70-20-10 rule. The 70% of the time you spend working on your core business, 20% expanding and extending, and 10% on blue sky stuff, fresh new things. And I think that applies in our personal development also. Core, and going to the future. What are your views on making people future ready? And teams and large groups of people, because you're a team leader. And it's people like yourselves who have that vision to make people future ready. What are your thoughts, and what are the type of actions you're taking? So
I think it's about training on the emotional state, and it's about training on the behaviors and the values. So and understanding the generation that's coming through. I'll give a very simple example. I dropped my 11-year-old daughter off at football last night, and we're walking past the paddle courts. And I said, I thought they'd be busy at these paddle courts, fastest growing sport in the world. I thought, she said, young people these days, it's probably not anymore. They've probably forgot about it. It was a fad. I don't think it is, but it was an interesting 11-year-old's perspective. It's probably moved on. It's a whole sport. People have built court. How do you think in that world? What if she was right? What if you build a court and then 3 months later the game's changed? How do you plan for that? How do you think of building? And again, I love living in the UAE because of the change, because of the speed you see things. So I think it's less about the technical training. I think it's about how you work with people and that flexibility, that adaptability, and how you train that. But I also think it's about enjoying that. So for me, so when I went back to interviewing people, you've got to learn to enjoy that.
Sure.
You've got to learn to be comfortable with that change and actually find that in curiosity, the enjoyment and the enjoyment in letting something go and saying, it's okay. There's something new to it.
I would go, as a futurist, I would go beyond that, because one of the phrases that I use is that the future has already happened, just unevenly distributed. It hasn't quite arrived in the form that you look at. So, for example, I can define those 7-10 new jobs in the year 2030 today. One of them is going to be an AR, VR journey builder. So you'll have young people working in your environment and I will come in and say, well, I'd like to do shopping, and my AR glasses train me on that. What we've seen over the last 3 months with ChatGPT is the rate and the speed at which new technologies will come in, and they'll shift the way we work, and the future of work is going to change. So what I'm getting to is, as you project your voice into the future, you'll get people ready from within, but what are we doing to get them ready from outside?
So I think there's two things. One, I think it's about making sure everyone understands their role. I remember 10 years ago, one of the best leads I've worked for was a 50-year-old finance director. As boring a person as you could imagine. Apologies to 50-year-old finance directors, but maybe it might be seen like he was the most technically aware person I knew. He was the leader of the business, and he says, if you're not tech savvy, if you're not aware of technology, leave the room, you're not in my team. There's no IT, there's no digital team, it's everybody's job.
Correct.
It is 100%, everything's digital. I don't want a digital angle, I don't want a digital department. Everything's digital, everything's on the phone. If you don't get that, leave now. I cannot ever accept somebody said, I'm not this, I'm not that. And I think that's a great mentality to have, and I think you have to educate that. Also, I think why diversity is even more important. And again, why we're at a benefit in this country, if you look at the amazing diverse population, the diverse makeup of this country. Because when something like ChatGPT comes along, if you've got who knows where it's going? Look at the last 3 months. Who knows what's the next 3 months?
100%.
My guess to yours may be wildly different. Yeah. And we both may be wildly wrong. We may be right. But that diverse thinking and that diverse team is even more important. So what I do to prepare is I recruit diversity. I've always, and I love diversity, because the last thing I want to do is see people who think and act like me or have got my experience, because I've got that. I know I have that perspective, but it's fairly small. It's one person's life experience and perspective. When I hear someone who thinks different to me, who has different background to me, different experiences, the education I get is phenomenal. Yep. And again, I give a lot of stories around my children, because I try and bring it back to people that they can relate and that think of it differently. My daughter's birthday party, she had 10 friends, not one friend had the same nationality parents. And there was something like 20 parents, so 15 nationalities, and they're all different. And the learning and the education in that, when I was brought up, no one lived out of that city. No one came from, it's immense. And I see that in her, and I see that breadth. Now, you can build that in a workplace. You can build that diversity, that when something fresh comes in, you've got a different perspective. And that breadth of perspective, I think, is really important.
Thank you for that. One of the initiatives we've done recently as a company, and it's something that I think may resonate with you, especially as we're looking into the future. I call it the 60-40-20 rule. The 60-somethings are making decisions, the big decisions. The 40-somethings are executing. And the 20-somethings are the biggest demographic actually consuming it. So you have a 2-generational gap between the 65-year-old CEO making some big strategic decisions and an 18-year-old school. So we've created a youth advisory board, and we've just recently launched one of them in the region as a public listed company. 11 kids at the average age is 24, and 8 of them are women, are girls. 2 of them are 19-year-old girls. And they went into the board meeting and they absolutely blew them away. And the reason I'm sharing that with you is that their whole thinking was different. Like you talk about diversity. They are digital natives, so they can advise the board. They're now going to shadow the board. And each board member will have a little buddy who will be telling them, sitting there and saying, this doesn't work, that's not digital enough, what about this, what about metaverse, what about AI? What I'm reaching towards is for your managers and more senior people. I have a young 23, 24-year-old. He runs circles around me when it comes to ChatGPT and other things. That's what I'm learning from him. He's my reverse mentor. What are your thoughts in terms of building that kind of reverse mentoring within your organization and your management team, and saying, you got to get yourself a 20-year-old, every one of you, because otherwise you're getting left behind.
Love it. Great example. I think there's 2 ways to it. There's a structured way to talk about. I think there's also an unstructured way. When we had the COVID challenge, I set up something called corridor conversations, because what I was missing most, whenever I've done anything, when I agreed that strategy in 17 days, I rang 100 leaders to say, what are the best 2 things about the business? What are the worst 2 things about the business? To listen, your point about listening. So I find I can learn the most when I'm walking the floor, when I'm talking to the people who are doing the job. Again, if I think where I came from at 16, I know I have the best answers when I talk to customers. I have a saying, the closer you are to the customer, the more likely you are to be right. So the people who are most likely to be wrong are the leaders, which I'm one of. So you have to listen to those people. So I love that approach and think it's so true. But I think there's an informal way to do it as well. I think making sure you constantly listen, you take any R&D, any new product, any new proposition to the people who talk to customers and listen to them. They always have the answers.
That's the cultural element, the infusion that you're doing.
Yeah.
Peter, as we come towards the end of this conversation, in the last segment, I'd love to talk to you about, say, 10 years to 20 years from now. If you put a message in a bottle for your 11-year-old daughter and 13-year-old son, and they picked up this thing 10 years from now, what will that message say to them?
I think it said 2 things. It would say, be happy and be your best. And I'll explain. Be happy, I think, I want my kids to love what they're doing. I've had an amazing life. I love every day. I think life gets better every day. I wake up with energy, with positivity. And I think that's infectious to people. I feel better from it. So I want them to do whatever they do, enjoy it, be happy, love what you do. And I think that's half the battle. Be your best is something, sort of a philosophy I've lived with and taught to my kids and in the work environment. And it came from running. So I'm a deeply competitive person. So I always want to win. I always want to be the best. I see that with my kids. And so I started running in my 40s. And I ran a 5K, which I'd never ran in my whole life. I never ran. And it was really difficult. I couldn't do it to start with. Then bit by bit, I got better. I started competing on times, and then I started getting better. And then I came, okay in my age group. Then I did 10K. I eventually did a half marathon, then marathon, then an ultra marathon, 56 kilometers in Cape Town, uphill. It's called the Two Oceans. But what I learned from that was every time I looked what the best standard was, I was miles behind. Miles behind. But I felt like Superman. I felt amazing because I'd never ran before. Now I'm running marathons to train. I'm running half marathons to train. And what I realized was I was doing the best that I could be. And so what I say to my kids is, you can only be your best. There'll be someone cleverer than you always. There'll be someone better at the sport than you always. You can only compete with yourself. You can only be the best you are. And in a work environment, we've created something called Be Your Best. With every month you get an award if you beat your best. Because it's great. Everyone wants to be the top person. We give trophies and awards for that. Yeah. But when you lead thousands of people, if every individual is a slight bit better than their best, that's when you make transformational change, when everybody's part of it, not just a few people. Yeah. So I would say be happy, be your best.
In today's world, there's a huge trust deficit in the financial world, and 3 banks have recently failed in the US. The contagion could be much, much greater. They're trying very hard to control it. As you project into, let's say, the year 2030, what are the top 2 or 3 things we need to see in financial institutions globally and locally to make sure that we are successful, stable, and trustworthy?
Yeah. I think the first one is build that platform and that trust. And I think the regulation is important because of that, making sure, there's discipline and controls in banks. We've seen, like you said, in other countries, the risk of that. And I remember back to, a previous crisis and the experience of that and the lessons you learned. So I think, first of all, that discipline, that structure, it is really important within that. Then I think you've got to have that agile mentality that goes on top of that. And it's a contradiction in a way, discipline, structure and regulation and agile. I don't think it is, because you've got to be able to have that as a foundation, but on top of that, change for what the customer wants. If you follow what the customer wants, I don't think you'll go too far wrong, but you've got to look at what the customer wants, look after and have that kind of mindset where you could do that. So you're going with what the customer wants.
May I challenge you on that?
Go for
I
it.
don't think the customer knows what they actually want because they don't even know what is
Yeah.
about to come. So it's really you are the leader in terms of knowledge and content to actually guide, coach, and support the customer to actually know what they want. When Steve Jobs was coming out with a cell phone, customers didn't know that.
Yeah.
So customers could be asking for faster horses, but actually giving them a car.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think we need to recalibrate that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair point, but I think I'd add to it that things like AI can enable much better. So I think with the right AI, customers will become more informed. Quicker, and through ChatGPT, all those things we talked about. So I think customers will become more informed. But I agree with the point. You've got to drive in the right way. I would then go to that diversity point. I think one of the fundamentals of a business is making sure you have that diversity. If you have that diversity, and you're not talking about gender, about race, you're talking about everything. You're talking about age, experience, nationality, culture. That diversity allows you to make the best decisions. And for me, that was one of my biggest learnings going to different countries. You learn so much more when you're surrounded by people who don't look and act like you. If you're only surrounded by people who look and act like you, you learn certain things. I think in a friendship group, it's lovely to have friends and people who are different and who have a different perspective. And that's a business issue. I don't think that's a soft leadership issue. I think that's a fundamental business issue. So when you talk about gender equality, when you talk about race equality, and like I say, I broaden it to all those things, to me, that's a business issue. It's not a soft issue.
I get it.
It's a hard issue because if you've got that, you've got that stability that comes from better decision making that stops making some of the mistakes that you've seen.
Indeed. Let's put you on a time machine, take you to your 100th birthday. You're only at half time. You're going to do anything you want. and the way technology is developing, you'll probably live to 120. So you've got enough to play with. What would we be celebrating? Or what would we be saying, Peter, wonderful, and we'll come in and congratulate you and felicitate you?
No. I think of circles. So I think of the first circle is family. And I think about, that my kids are happy, they're making a difference, the people, not just family in a broader sense, the people that I mix with and interact make a difference. I then think about, as a leader, I always think as a leader, the people you influence. I think you have a massive influence on people. I think of the moments in my life, it's through people we've interacted. So what have those people made a difference? How have I made a difference to those lives? Those people who are looking at me, have I made a difference to their lives? Do they have a story to tell that, Peter said this and it really just made me think? And, so I think of finally I think of purpose. And what is your purpose? What is your what difference have you made? What sort of societal difference? What difference do people see because of what you did? The difference that you made, and hopefully a celebration is I'm a positive, optimistic person. Maybe we'll be looking at another 50. Maybe we'll say that's half time at 100. Maybe we'll be saying it's 200 then. So
Indeed.
Who knows? We don't know.
Peter, I can keep talking to you forever. It was been an absolute delight, absolute pleasure talking to you and chatting about all sorts of things. And I dare say this will inspire a lot of people. And you've been human, you've been authentic, you spoke about your family. These are the kind of amazing values that really will guide our future. So thank you very much indeed. It's a real pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. Great privilege. Lovely talking to you, Tarek. Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you.